Hey everyone, this is Dustin Mooney with TechXCyber and cyberfinders.com. TechXCyber is a cybersecurity consulting firm. We help our clients identify their cybersecurity risks, map their business needs, their goals, and their missions, and then provide solutions to reduce their cybersecurity risks so that they can achieve their daily goals and objectives. On the other hand, I work on CyberFinders. This is a web application that helps companies in need of cybersecurity services get matched with experts like me or other experts in the industry so that they can find a partner to go forward with their cybersecurity projects, and they can build a relationship. So it's kind of a matching service. So if you want some more information, feel free to go to cyberfinders.com. You can also check out TechXCyber as well for more information. So it's been a little bit since I did a cyber talk, and I wanted to do one, and this one's going to go a little bit more in like a technical route. So what I'm really trying to do is I want to find a middle ground between getting too technical and confusing people, and I want everybody to be able to understand this and take something away. So it's not meant for a more senior forensic investigator who already knows what they're doing. It could be a good refresher, but if you're junior, this could be good for you. Or if you're a business owner, it might be important for you to understand how these things work so you can better protect yourself. So let me see if I can fall in the middle here. And so I recently did a forensic investigation where there was a double extortion attack. So I want to talk about the artifacts that I saw, and I want to talk about how those artifacts match up to the phases that a hacker will go through as they attack a system or a network. And it had been a little while since I actually had thought about these phases in a very intentful way, and I wanted to make sure I had my vocabulary right and the words right. So I went and did some Googling. So okay, what are people calling these phases again? Just been a little bit since I had said these words out loud. So I went and I started looking, and something interesting happened. I started seeing some inconsistencies. Some people were saying there were 5 phases, some people were saying there was 3, some were saying there was 4. And I'm going to kind of challenge this a little bit, and I think we've kind of moved on a little bit because these are old school, right? These are things that have been around for a while. There are these techniques that we've believed hackers have used, and what I've seen is that they've evolved. And not in a way that it's super confusing, but just in a way that things have gotten shifted around, especially in this double extortion attack. So I want to call it the 5 phases, the old school 5 phases that we used to kind of learn about in SANS classes when we were doing our pen testing classes, our GPens and things like that. So the first one is reconnaissance. This is where the hacker's gathering open source information about the target that they're going to go after. Next one is scanning. They're going to use scanners and vulnerability assessment tools to scan the infrastructure to find vulnerabilities that they may be able to launch and exploit against. The next one is gaining access. So if there is a vulnerability that can be exploited and we can create some sort of hands-on keyboard situation through like a reverse shell, we're going to gain initial access. Then we're going to try to maintain access. Those reverse shells can be broken pretty quickly, and if you lose it, you might not be able to get it again. So we want to maintain access as a hacker. And then the last thing is covering your tracks and clearing up what you had done. So that was the 5-phase approach. I saw some smaller ones, like I said, and as I started doing this investigation, I started thinking, actually, there's more. And they kind of started shifting around. And I want to kind of go through some of these and talk about what I saw and talk about the point of them and talk about, as a forensic investigator, like what does it look like after an event has happened and I come in and I see these artifacts? How do they map to some of these phases, and what are these new phases that I'm kind of calling out here that I saw? And quite frankly, like let's just say these old phases have these new sub-phases. I think that's a good way to say it. So I was doing an investigation, as I said, for this double extortion. So by the way, double extortion is a ransomware infection after a compromise has happened, a hacking event has happened. And then the hacker will then exfiltrate files as well as file lists and kind of come to the compromised company and tell them, hey, I'm going to release your data if you don't pay the ransom. It's a little bit more of an incentive for the company to pay the hacker at the end of the day, so it's a little bit more advantageous for the hacker. And so as I was doing this investigation, I started seeing these artifacts that kind of hit some of these old phases, but they really were different as well. So let's start at the top. I think reconnaissance is still up there, but this is a little bit different, right? In this investigation, there was an RDP server involved. And when I do these, most of the time it's an RDP server as the initial source of compromise. typically what happens is you have an IT provider who is more concerned about functionality, less concerned about cybersecurity. So they may stand up something that the business needs to perform their daily business functions and neglect to think about how maybe it could impact their cybersecurity. And so what happens is these RDP servers get exposed to the internet. And when you put this on the internet, it tells the whole internet, hey, I'm an RDP server, I'm here and I'm waiting for a connection. Guess who's looking for this? Hackers. Typically we see a brute force attack towards these RDP servers where a weak password is eventually guessed and the hacker gets to log in. So that's how I've kind of seen these things play out pretty frequently. This one was a little bit different. So I did get an RDP server, so I thought, great, this is a great place to start. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to see here. I also got a file share and I got a application server. So it was 3 servers in scope. So I started with the RDP server going, hey, all right, let's look for the brute force, right? Because that's how this is always happening. Interestingly enough, I did not see a brute force attack coming from an external environment. Let me correct that. I did see one, but it came later after the attack had already happened. So my feeling was that there was 2 attacks happening. But prior to that, I saw evidence of a previous compromise, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. I was like, well, why is this RDP server already compromised without a brute force? So I didn't know what was going on. So it took me a little while to figure it out, and I did. But I wanted to mention that. So that reconnaissance phase is the hackers looking for that vulnerability. They're trying to find places that they can get into your network. Exposed RDP server to the internet, big no-no. This is how they're getting in. So again, if you've got that, turn that off or secure it in a proper way. That's a whole nother chat. I won't go down that road, but let's keep going. So after we have this reconnaissance and the hacker finds that you've got something available for them to go through, we have a compromise, right? And so this can happen in a couple different ways. We can have malware compromises where a piece of malware is able to get inside the network, talk outbound, and then it can receive receive commands to a command and control server. We also have penetration testing kind of activities or hacking activities where we find vulnerabilities, we can launch an exploit against them. Payload gets sent over, and what happens is we create something called a reverse shell. This is like opening a command prompt remotely and then performing malicious activities in that command prompt. So that initial compromise is definitely something that we want to know about. And so as I was doing this investigation, I started looking for, well, what's the initial compromise? And as I said earlier, I thought it was the RDP account, but it wasn't. It wasn't the RDP server. How did I know that? As I started looking, I found a PowerShell history artifact that showed that the hacker was calling commands from other devices inside of the network from the RDP server. So that told me that these commands and these malicious scripts that were being called were already placed on other other systems that were compromised, and these were endpoints. They weren't servers. The naming conventions told me that they were endpoints. So you're just talking your daily worker's computer. So in this investigation, I actually could not figure out how the initial compromise occurred because I didn't have those as part of the scope of the investigation. So, and as you do these investigations, usually the initial compromise can be one of the most challenging things to find. So in this case, I couldn't nail it down. I didn't have the evidence, but there was still a lot going on. So I still had a lot to look at. So when I saw that these scripts were being called, I started seeing references to some of these hacker phases, and I went, oh, okay, here we are, right? So first one that I observed was the reconnaissance, exposed RDP server. There must have been something that tipped off the hacker, again, that I didn't get to see because I didn't have the initial evidence, or all of the evidence. The other was the initial compromise. Again, it looks like other machines in the environment were compromised prior to the one that I was looking at, so it threw me off a little bit. But what I did see was in these scripts that were being called is that it was actually for the 4th step, which is privilege escalation. So the hacker had the initial compromise. So when this compromise happens, let's say we've got a reverse shell run, you're running at a certain level of access. You might be running as a local user. And in IT environments, a lot of times local users can't, install software. They can't do certain malicious other activities. For instance, hackers want to turn off antivirus. Guess who can't turn off antivirus? A standard user. So you need to escalate your privileges. So how does this happen? So I saw calling of these malicious scripts to escalate privileges. And how did I know this? Well, there was a user account that was not an administrator account that seemed to be doing a lot of bad stuff. until I saw these scripts getting run. And in the PowerShell history, after the scripts get run, the malicious software gets executed, you see the hacker typing, "Who am I?" "Who am I" command goes, what is the level of access that I have? And I could see that after that, they had been elevated to the administrator account. So this is that privilege escalation attack that allowed them to gain control of the administrator attack. Then we saw use of, it wasn't Mimikatz, it was actually called PyCat, so a Python-based Mimikatz. Mimikatz pulls down authentication credentials from memory. It's likely that the hacker pulled down hash values, was able to crack those, and then use those to continue the attack. So we saw the attacker elevating privileges to the administrator account, and then after that we saw the domain administrator account doing particular malicious activities. So, and this all followed a very specific order. So once that domain administrator account happened, then we had lateral movement. And so the lateral movement was used through psexec as well as smbexec, and there were some other malicious scripts that may have allowed this as well. I just had file names and references in these artifacts. I didn't have the full artifact. Again, I didn't have all the evidence, so I couldn't confirm this. But the psexec being used, that's clear indication of lateral movement. Passing the hash attack is what we call it. So at this point, the hacker started moving around in the network, and as part of the, in the old phase, right, we have recon and then scanning. Scanning is also sometimes called enumeration. So we want to know, like, where are we? What's happening in the network? And this happened before the privilege escalation, and it happened after the privilege escalation. But the second, let's just call it like the second enumeration, was a little bit different of a flavor. This enumeration was browsing files, looking for attractive file names, applications, and databases. There was a user that had a Excel spreadsheet called passwords.xls, right? And so I could see that the hacker had gone to that. So what I learned from that is the intent of the hacker is that they're looking for something interesting that they can get their hands on. So once they find these interesting things that they were getting their hands on, I then was able to go and look and see, okay, now I found some extra artifacts of data exfiltration. So we saw PowerShell scripts for creating file lists, as well as uploading files to a particular web server that was owned by the hacker. So once these files are exfiltrated, then, a couple days later, you've got the ransom and the extortion that happens. So all the files get locked up through the ransomware attack, and then the extortion email comes to the client, the compromised client, and says, hey, you need to pay to have your decryption key. Okay, so just calling that out again. So I'm going to go through the old one. So it was reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, clearing tracks. Oh, let me add a number 10 here as I talk about this, because there was definitely some clearing tracks happened as well. So again, one more time. So reconnaissance, scanning, gaining access, maintaining access, clearing tracks. So what I saw was reconnaissance, compromise, scanning and enumeration, privilege escalation. We did see maintaining access through a malicious file that was being loaded pretty consistently, as well as updating registry tasks, and I believe scheduled tasks were created as well, so helping maintain access. Lateral movement through psexec, smbexec, enumeration of the more interesting files. Then we had the exfiltration of those files, and then the ransom extortion. And honestly, I think the clearing tracks, like maybe that's number 10, or that, on my list I've got 10 things here, but I think that happened throughout the process. I saw artifacts where it was referencing malicious files and folders that were no longer in the file system. So I had artifacts talking about them, but I couldn't see them anymore. So that told me that the hacker was cleaning up a little bit. Another thing was Internet Explorer history was cleared out. And luckily through file carving, I was able to pull some Explorer history out that was clearly the attacker going after some interesting places that they wanted to get to. So just kind of like clarifying here what happens during these attacks. So we had these phases of a penetration test or a hacker. I actually see more phases as a forensic analyst. I see more things happening in these different particular phases. And so it was interesting to me, and I wanted to bring clarification to this. And one of the things I talk a lot about here is defense in depth. So the hacker has to go through 10 different phases to get to the place that they want to do, which is the very end, the ransom or the extortion. So during each of these phases, we can put alerts, we can do monitoring, we can block certain things to prevent each of them from happening. And so like if phase 1 or 2 doesn't work and we don't have the proper protections in place, maybe number 3 is in place and we can stop it. So let's say the reconnaissance happened, the initial compromise happened, but we've got an IDS installed and a port scan starts going on, which happened. There was scanning that happened. This IDS may fire, alert somebody and tell them, hey, you've got something malicious happening here. Same thing, let's say that didn't happen and the hacker got to privilege escalation. We could have had systems that were fully up to date where these particular exploits that would allow escalation of privileges may not have occurred at all. And so as we do this, we want to find these different methods of protection that we can implement through these phases so that we can prevent these hacks from happening even further. So if you find yourself on the bad end of a hacking incident, this is probably what the hackers are going through these days. We see a lot of this double extortion happening. Things have changed, right? And so hackers used to do these things for fun. They used to do these things to steal information and data. And it seems a little bit less like they care about those types of things now. It's more about trying to get you to pay through some sort of cryptocurrency, pay their ransom, pay their extortion, so that they can make money in a little bit of an easier way. So going to wrap this one up. That is kind of some summary of what happened in this recent incident that I have investigated. I have a pretty good feeling that this is going to happen again. This is the methods that the hackers are using. And so the cool thing is I, as a forensic investigator, can know that these are the TTPs, we call them, tactics, procedures. I'm forgetting the last, I don't know, my brain, something's happening there. But there are these common techniques that they're using over and over again, and we can map those and know what they are and understand them, and then go look for them in later attack investigations. So go ahead and wrap this one up. If you have any questions, you want to reach out, you want to learn how you can better protect yourself, feel free to email me. Again, I am Dustin@techxcyber.com. If you need some help in a cybersecurity project, you want to find a consultant, go ahead and head over to cyberfinders.com. You can register for free, request help, and we've got some consultants up there that can find you some assistance and get you a pretty good project price. Thanks a lot, and I will check in with you guys another time. Take care.